Did you know that The Office got a little bit of help from Donald Trump when it first premiered? The US Office first started 20 years ago this week, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind The Office begins in 1997 at UK radio station XFM, where 38-year-old Ricky Gervais was working as the head of speech. He needed an assistant, so he interviewed and later hired the first resume that came across his desk, Stephen Merchant. Merchant had just graduated from the University of Warwick in 1996 with a BA in film and literature. While working at XFM under Gervais, Merchant signed up for a TV production training course at the BBC, and for this class you had to make a short film. Ricky Gervais, meanwhile, had been doing this bad boss character at the radio station just to make his coworkers laugh. And so, in June 1998, the two of them decided to make that guy the subject of Merchant's project. It became the 20-minute short film, Seedy Boss. The BBC was apparently very impressed with this piece. Producer Ash Atala showed the tape to BBC Two head Jane Root, and despite the fact that Gervais and Merchant had no prior TV experience, they hired them to write a pilot based on Seedy Boss, which grew into the series The Office. In total, they made 12 episodes and a Christmas special, airing between 2001 and 2003. While the ratings were low at first, it grew to become a global success. Lauded for its unique mockumentary style, The Office won the Golden Globe for Best Comedy in 2004, and it's since been called one of the best UK sitcoms of all time. In the early 2000s, NBC was in the habit of adapting UK comedies. In 2003, it tried and failed to launch a remake of Coupling by using the same exact scripts as the British original. Despite that failure, the network acquired the rights to The Office, and that same year it tapped Greg Daniels, who wrote on SNL, The Simpsons, and King of the Hill, to make the American version. There seemed to be some confusion there though, because as Daniels told Boston.com in 2015, he first thought he was going to be writing on the original British series, and later learned that his job was to do an American remake. Daniels said the fear of messing up such a beloved show gave him nightmares, which might be why the first episode sticks so closely to the source material. He briefly considered using the Dundies idea for the pilot, but instead he thought that following the British pilot would be safer because that's what the network wanted. While it's not the same exact script, it's remarkably close and uses many of the same characters. Michael Scott was loosely based on David Brent, Jim based on Tim, Pam based on Don, and Dwight based on Gareth. As part of the writing process on the American pilot, Daniels and producers Howard Klein and Ben Silverman met with Gervais and Merchant in the UK. One of the things they discussed was how race should play a bigger factor in the US show, which would go on to influence the second episode, Diversity Day. For the US setting, they knew they wanted gray skies, bad weather, and educated people hanging around, and for the show to be near a big city, but not in the big city. This led Daniels to consider Nashua, New Hampshire, and Yonkers, New York, before he settled on Scranton, Pennsylvania. And they went with The Office being a paper company because it's boring and not very popular. The Scranton branch's address is 1725 Slough Avenue, which isn't a real street in Scranton. Instead, it's a reference to Slough, England, where the original series takes place. Though they would name-check real Scranton locations throughout the series, including Cooper's Seafood Restaurant, Poor Richard's, and the Steamtown Mall. With the pilot script ready, it was time to cast the show. According to Jenna Fisher, the casting process was a bit unusual. Some sessions just included the actors answering questions in character and improvising without a script. And The Office has some legendary casting what-ifs. NBC programming chief Kevin Riley initially wanted Paul Giamatti to play Michael Scott, but he declined. Martin Short, Hank Azaria, and Bob Odenkirk were also interested, and we later learned that Ben Falcone, Alan Tudyk, and Paul F. Tompkins auditioned as well. But it came down to Odenkirk and Steve Carell, with the latter winning out. Carell only watched half of the first episode of the UK version before auditioning because he didn't want to mimic Ricky Gervais. Rainn Wilson also originally auditioned for Michael too, and said in that audition he did a terrible Ricky Gervais impersonation. The casting team liked him though, and made him Dwight. He beat out Seth Rogen, Matt Besser, Patton Oswalt, and Judah Friedlander. John Krasinski was on the verge of quitting acting before he auditioned for The Office, but his mom suggested he give himself to the end of the year, and he ended up booking the show about 3 weeks later. He was first brought in for the role of Dwight, but asked to read for Jim instead. Krasinski also really put his foot in his mouth in the waiting room at his audition. A guy who was there next to him asked him if he was nervous, and he said no because he loved the original and thought the writers would screw up this remake anyway. The guy he was talking to turned out to be showrunner Greg Daniels. Krasinski ended up beating out Adam Scott and John Cho for the part of Jim. Jenna Fisher prepped for her audition by looking as boring as possible, and she invented Pam's original hairstyle when she auditioned. She ended up beating out Katherine Hahn for the role. Fisher and Krasinski both tell a story about the final round of auditions. There were 4 possible Jims and 4 possible Pams, and the producers had them all read in different pairs. Fisher thought Krasinski was the best Jim, and Krasinski thought Fisher was the best Pam, and they secretly hoped that they'd get paired up together, and that's exactly what happened. Krasinski and Fisher were reportedly paid around $20,000 an episode at first, and then around $100,000 an episode by season 4. Angela Kinsey had also originally auditioned for Pam, but the producers thought she was too feisty for the role, so they made her Angela Martin instead. Kate Flannery, meanwhile, first auditioned for the role of Jan before landing Meredith. Brian Baumgartner auditioned for Stanley, but ended up as Kevin. But maybe the coolest casting story is how Philip Smith ended up in the show. Smith was a casting associate for Allison Jones and often read with the actors who were auditioning. The pilot's director, Kevin Quapis, liked her delivery so much, they invented the part of Phyllis specifically for her. After casting was complete, some of the writers, producers, and actors went to Scranton on a research trip. John Krasinski brought his mini DV camera with him, filming things around town, and that footage was later used in the show's opening title sequence. To create The Office's signature documentary style, they hired cinematographer Randall Einhorn, who was best known for directing episodes of Survivor, and they purposely built the show's set having an open office floor plan, which allowed the action and the cameras to flow through the space. The set was built with immovable walls, which is unusual for TV, but it did help create an airless, claustrophobic environment. The computers on set were real and had internet, which entertained the cast when they had to just sit at their desks during filming. Early on, the show stuck very close to the documentary format and only wrote things that a real doc camera crew could theoretically capture. Later in the show's run, these rules became much more flexible. The first season of the show was filmed in a real office space in Culver City, California, but then for the remaining seasons, the set was rebuilt at Chandler Valley Center Studios in the San Fernando Valley, and the office building exteriors were done there as well. So NBC liked the pilot enough to give it a 6-episode order. Daniels brought on writers Mindy Kaling, BJ Novak, Paul Lieberstein, and Mike Schur. BJ Novak was cast as Ryan after Daniels saw his stand-up. Paul Lieberstein became Tony Flenderson thanks to his impressive cold readings of scripts, and at first Greg Daniels wasn't sure if Mindy Kaling would appear on screen, but when they wrote Diversity Day, they needed a minority to slap Michael, and she fit right in, creating the character of Kelly. Mindy Kaling ended up writing more episodes than anyone else on the show, 24 episodes total over its 9 seasons. With the writers' room assembled and the show cast, they could now figure out what the rest of the show would look like. As they wrote the rest of the first season, they still relied somewhat on the British version, especially with Michael Scott, but they were able to start differentiating their show a little bit more. For the show's theme song, Daniels and the cast originally wanted to use ELO's Mr. Blue Sky, but unfortunately the drama series LAX beat them to it. So the show hired Jay Ferguson to create its original theme music, which would later become iconic. The US office premiered on NBC Thursday, March 24th, 2005. And thanks to its lead-in, The Apprentice starring Donald Trump, it did a big number, 11.2 million viewers. It then moved to Tuesday for its second week and lost half of that audience. Those first episodes averaged 5.4 million viewers. Critics were very mixed on the first episode and first season, mostly criticizing it for being a poor adaptation. Thankfully, NBC gave the show another chance and the writers made some changes. They made the show more optimistic, they made Michael Scott more likable, they increased the presence and relatability of the supporting characters, and they made the lights in the office itself brighter to have the show stand apart from the original series. Also in the summer of 2005, Steve Carell became a movie star with The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which significantly boosted the show's profile. When the show came back for season 2, it grew into a critical and ratings hit, and it was especially popular on the iTunes platform, where TV shows had just become available for purchase. By season 5, the show was averaging 9 million viewers an episode. The most expensive shot in Office history is Jim's proposal to Pam. Daniels wanted to do it at an East Coast gas station, but it was deemed too expensive to fly the crew out, so instead they built a gas station from scratch in a parking lot in LA, and it ended up costing $250,000. The season 5 CPR episode helped save someone's life. In 2019, an Arizona man successfully performed CPR on a stranger in need because he learned from The Office that you're supposed to pump to the rhythm of Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. Over the course of its run, it would be nominated for 42 Emmys total, winning 5, including Outstanding Comedy Series for season 2. Steve Carell was nominated for 6 Emmys total, but he never won. On the other hand, he did win a Golden Globe. The show's ensemble also won the SAG Award twice, and the series won a Peabody. Steve Carell would end up leaving the show in season 6, and they retired his number from the call sheet. He was always number 1 on the call sheet. For the rest of the series, the call sheet started with number 2. From season 6 on, the series saw declining viewership and critics' scores, until it went off the air in 2013 after 9 seasons total. 5.7 million people tuned into the final episode on May 16th, 2013. And Daniels kept Steve Carell's appearance in the finale a secret from most of the cast, crew, and even NBC executives. Over the course of its run, The Office had some truly huge guest stars, including Will Ferrell, Amy Adams, Roseanne Barr, Jim Carrey, Kathy Bates, Ray Romano, and Jack Black. James Spader was only supposed to make a cameo appearance, but they liked him so much he ended up in 20 episodes total. Ricky Gervais also ended up appearing on the show as David Brent. And the show had a number of celebrity guest directors as well, including J.J. Abrams, Joss Whedon, Jon Favreau, Harold Ramis, Jason Reitman, and Mark Webb. The US Office has gone on to have massive cultural impact, and 20 years later is still very present in the culture. In 2007, Scranton, PA hosted a big Office convention with many cast members and writers in attendance. The city itself has gone to embrace the show, putting up Dunder Mifflin logos around town. The Office, a musical parody, opened off-Broadway in 2018, and The Office has inspired multiple rewatch podcasts. Most famously is the Office Ladies podcast, hosted by Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey. And Brian Baumgartner also has a recollection podcast, The Office Deep Dive. And the show is still immensely popular on streaming. In 2020, it was the most streamed TV series of the year, with 57 billion minutes watched. The Office popularized the mockumentary mockumentary comedy series format on US television, which led to Modern Family, Abbott Elementary, and What We Do in the Shadows. But The Office directly gave us Parks and Recreation and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Parks and Rec, which was created by Greg Daniels and Mike Schur, was originally conceived as an Office spin-off. It evolved to be instead a thematic spin-off, taking the mockumentary format and character-based comedy approach to local government. And then Schur enlisted Parks writer Dan Gore to create Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which applied the format in a police precinct. There was also a planned spin-off of The Office that was going to center around Dwight and his family called Schrute Farms, but it never came to be. But fast forward to 2025, Greg Daniels was tapped by Peacock to create a new semi-spin-off of The Office. It's called The Paper, and it takes place at a local newspaper. It stars Donald Gleason and Sabrina Impacciatori, with Oscar Nunez reprising his role from The Office. Production began in summer 2024, so a 2025 release seems likely.